We are rolling on red and...
We're rolling here.
Okay.
So I think just start by, and I don't know if you want him to talk to me or to the camera.
Talk to me. Like,
Okay.
Talk to me, look at the lens.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to hear a little bit about your time in Vietnam. Were you drafted?
I was going to be drafted, so I joined the Navy. I joined the U.S. Naval Reserve, backbone of the Navy, I might add. I joined the unit here in Walla Walla. Then we went to boot camp, came back, went to a Class A school. I became a postal clerk. So when I went on active duty, I was a rated seaman, which means I can only be asked to do jobs that my rating covers. So if you're being transferred to a different station, killing time at that unit, waiting for your transfer papers, they couldn't ask me to go out and mow the lawn. They could ask me to go in the clerical office and type or whatever you wanted to do. So that was kind of cool. The downside, no one ever knew my name. I was always PC, postal clerk. When I went to a new assignment, nobody knew that guy's name either, except he was the PC. I'm the new PC. I always thought that was kind of interesting.
So when you came back from Vietnam and things were a little bit rocky.
Rachel, real quick, will you ask one more question about Vietnam? And Kelly, can you mention that it was during the Vietnam War? Just because there's no time reference for everything we just talked about.
Also, Kim, can you take off your jacket? I think it's going like that, just in case we...
Oh yeah, I don't hear it on here, but yeah.
You don't, just in case. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good call. Yeah. Actually, Cam, you're really good at asking questions. Do you have a follow-up question about that time?
I think just more, a little more color to it. How long you were there, or how long you were in the military, and the time period around it, just so that it frames what you just said. Because otherwise, it's out of so they don't know the time period yet. So it really sets the stage.
Yeah, so maybe lead into it with what was going on at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm going to look here because otherwise I know you want to look
All right,
at me.
you should sit behind the camera.
Will that make it easier?
Oh, that'd make it way easier.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Oh, yeah, that'd be much better.
Okay.
Yeah. I know because it's so unnatural. Yeah. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about like what the time was like leading up to, or during the early stage of Vietnam and mentioning Vietnam, of course, what Cam was talking about.
Well, in 1967, I was assigned to go to Vietnam, and we journeyed to Vietnam in an attack cargo ship, AKA 97, USS Matthews. There might have been 96, one of those. This is a ship, its top speed is about 10 knots, and we had a fleet. We had some LSDs, and they go about 3 to 4 knots. So that means crossing the Pacific Ocean took more than a month. It took forever. When we got to Vietnam, we proceeded to the Da Nang Harbor, to the Da Nang Naval Support Activity, and the ship anchored off from the beachhead there. And our job was to deliver mail and supplies to places like Hue, which is up the Perfume River, which had been a capital of the French Empire at one time. I had a lot of interesting experiences up there. One time I was in Hue, and they have lots of mud because it rains all the time. And there was kind of like a sheet of plywood sitting off in the middle of the road from a sidewalk. And I thought, I should have known better because a sheet of plywood is too expensive to just be thrown out there. So I jumped from the sidewalk to the sheet of plywood, and all I heard was a bang, a huge explosion, and I was literally blown up into a tree and didn't get a scratch. That's the first thing I checked to see, oh, this might be the Purple Heart, but no. People that were braver got got the Purple Hearts. That was one experience I had. Another experience I had going up the Perfume River, had a Thompson submachine gun, because when you're escorting mail, you have to be armed just in case. You've seen them on the movies, 30s Thompson submachine gun, 30-shot clip, straight clip. And I'd always get some extra shells from the gunnery. So, because if you fire shells, you got to come back and explain if you don't have the shells you left with, the count. So they'd always sneak me a few and see if I could get a goose or a duck or something. So I was going up the Perfume River. I'm standing up here. I got the Thompson held up like that. And we don't wear helmets. That's for the Army guys to put on and stuff. We're brave Navy guys, or maybe foolish Navy guys. So I'm holding the piece up in the air like that. And someone out there fired a shot, and it hit the receiver of the gun and knocked it into my head and knocked me out momentarily. I was on the deck, and I remember this guy, he was hollering, he was from down south. He was saying, they done killed the PC. They killed the PC. I said, no, I'm good here, but what happened? So that was one of my other adventures. Then just before the Tet Offensive of 1968, the captain who I was serving had to go to Taiwan to see General Chiang Kai-shek. I have shaken the hand of General Chiang Kai-shek, which is a great honor, at least if you're from Taiwan. So he needed somebody that could drive on the wrong side of the road, so to speak, because that's like how they do it in Japan. And I had the driver's license for that, so he took me, and I missed the Tet Offensive by just a week or two. We went to Taiwan instead, see General Chiang Kai-shek. So that was the highlights of my naval career there.
Awesome. Perfect. I know it's a little stilted that I'm like responding on a delay, but that's for editing purposes. But yeah, that's crazy. So, did you get enough from mentioning Vietnam and what year it was, that kind of stuff? I think.
Are we moving away from Vietnam?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna cut. Cam, will you cut that? Cam?
Rolling on sound.
All right.
So tell me about the lead up to Pam's disappearance.
Well, in July of 1970, Pam came to me and said she wanted a divorce, that she was pregnant with another guy's child, and they were going to take off and go to Spokane and live up there. We had 2 children at the time. She wanted me to keep the kids. I was working for the United States Post Office at the time. So then, the first part of August, we had moved into a new home on Isaacs Avenue, 1307. The house still sits there, beautiful house. We'd moved in there, we're getting things arranged, and she announced that night that, well, I'm going to go out and see my friend Philip Daniels. So she goes out, and then I thought, well, I need to go find her because I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I can't leave these 2 children in the house. So I went and found her. We went over to a friend's house. He was a fireman, him and his wife. We had a good talk. I thought things were going good. We got home, back to the house, and she said she wanted to go out and sleep in the car because when we moved with 2 cats, and they had run off. And she thought if it came back to the house and she was sleeping out in the car, she could hear them meowing. So I said, okay. So she went out there. Then about 3 o'clock in the morning, I thought, well, I need to go out and bring her back in here. Those cats aren't going to show up. So I went out there, and she was gone. So I didn't know what to think, because we'd had a murder shortly before this. I think it was called the Purple Poodle slaying, and then in a park just up the road from us, a woman had been attacked. So for my concerns for her, we jumped in the car, we being me and the 2 kids. I got them out of bed, and we drove around seeing if we could find her, and we had no luck. So in the morning, early morning, I called my mother-in-law to see if she could come and watch the kids so I cold go to work, because I told her Pam had gone to a party or stayed out a little late. I didn't want to alarm her. And she said, no, I can't do that. So I called the post office. And then I thought, well, I'm going to call the hospital. And then I called the sheriff's department. And immediately the sheriff's department says, you need to come down here, we want to talk to you. And right from the start, their scenario was husband killed wife. That was right from the start. So this is the first August 6th or August 7th. And so we had numerous conversations. In one conversation, they said, we want to search your house again. I said, oh, okay. So I gave my consent. What I didn't realize is they had already searched my house without my consent, and before the search warrant by the judge had been signed, they had searched my house, which should mean something to somebody, but it was harmless error according to the Court of Appeals. And so then in December 11th, 1970, I was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, went to the Walla Walla County Jail, no bail, and sat in there for a good part of a year before we went to trial. And at the time, I felt I'd been taught in school that if you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. And that, to me, that was, nothing to fear, because I did not kill her. And in the meantime, Scotty Ray was their chief criminal deputy. He calls me into his office and he's talking about, well, some years ago, the pig farmer killed his wife. But we figured, looking at it, it looks like he just accidentally backed over her and killed her. And then he says, that's what I'm seeing here. This is just an accident gone away. I said, she was murdered. This is no accident. Did you read the newspapers? It really ticked me off. And then he further explained, but if it was an accident and you pled guilty to it, you can get deferred sentencing. You won't lose your job at the post office. You'll be able to collect the life insurance money. There's like $20,000 life insurance money, like big deal. And I said, no, because that would mean if I did that, it would be a lie to the court to start with. And it also would mean that whoever killed her has gotten away with it. So I went to jury trial. The Joe McPherson case, that's the Purple Poodle case, he had gone to trial about a week before me. They had his fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that jury found that man not guilty. And that made me nervous. That's the first time I started feeling a little uneasy. If they could find old Joe, and he'd brag about it too, yeah, that bitch, da-da-da. I figured if they could find him not guilty, then they could very easily foul up and find me guilty. So we went to trial. The closing argument was Arthur E. Agers told the jury that I had never denied my guilt because I did not take the stand. My lawyer, Herbert H. Frizey, said that's a guaranteed new trial. Well, the Court of Appeals said, oh, it was in bad taste, but it's basically insignificant. And then down the road later, we find out there was evidence that they didn't present to my lawyer and didn't pursue. Like where my wife's body was found, there was recently discarded Olympia beer cans. Did they fingerprint them? No. And that's what got Governor Dixie Lee Ray involved in my case. Because about 1978, she's in Ellensburg at the State Patrol's training academy. She walks in, everybody says, oh, big to do. She said, no, just carry on. And they're talking about this is not how you do an investigation. So long story short, she went back to the prison sometime and talked to Superintendent Spaulding, wanted to know if he knew me. And of course, Jim Spaulding says, oh yeah, Messinger, he runs our motor pool. He's an okay guy. And that's how the governor got intervened here. So in 1980, I go to the parole board in August. And the parole board, the first guy says, you're going to have to do at least another 20 years. And I've already done almost 10 at this point. And the other guy at the parole board says, no, I'm looking at 30. So I just asked him outright. I said, why is that? And he said, well, you've never showed any remorse. You've never said you were sorry. And see, that was the biggest hurdle I had. I could not give the parole board what they wanted. They wanted you on your hands and knees sobbing about, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. I couldn't give it to it. It'd be a lie if I did that. Because I did not kill Pamela. So in October of 1980, I get a call from the superintendent. Jim Spalding tells me, Dixie Lee Ray just called, and she's ordered you released. And of course, it takes a month or so for the paperwork to do, get involved. In fact, Slade Gordon had to speed up the parole board to get me out of there because they were dragging their feet. He was Attorney General at the time. And you don't see those kind of things in real life. You see that in movies, but this did happen to me, and that's the facts.
Okay, let's cut.
So I want to go.
Rolling on sound.
So tell me about from going to Shelton after the trial into showing up in Walla Walla and like your impression that first week.
All right. About a week before I left the county jail to be transferred to Shelton, Shelton is the receiving unit for all inmates. All inmates go to Shelton to get, quote, classified, which is a waste of money because they could do it at their desk and never send you to Shelton. But a week before we went on this bus journey, the headlines, the Walla Walla Union Bulletin screamed, Messinger and gang attempt jailbreak. So then, nothing ever came of that. Some bricks had been removed, that's true. So we left, I believe it was first part of December, we left the county jail to go to Shelton. And you're handcuffed, you got leg irons on, you got a belly chain with the handcuffs are fastened to. And then, to add insult to injury, they fasten you to another guy. So if that guy wants to go to the bathroom, well, you got to go see what's going on. So we rolled into Shelton. We were there for, I think, a month and a half. And then we transferred all of the ones that had been classified to go to the Washington State Penitentiary, the maximum security institution in the state of Washington. We're then loaded on a bus, the Green Hornet. It was an old Greyhound bus painted green with bars in the windows. So we jumped in that, and it's pretty much an all-day ride from Shelton to Walla Walla. So we pull into the state prison there in Walla Walla, and they have an entrance, they call it a sally port. The sally port is where it has two gates, and when one gate's up, the other gate cannot be raised. So they drive the bus in, they close the gate behind it, then they open up the other gate, and they lead us out, they take off our handcuffs and leg irons and all the jewelry they've been so kind to fix us up with. Then they march us to the property room. And the place is just scroungy, dirty, peeling paint. I thought a prison with all this free labor would be spick and span. So we go out the sally port there into like a courtyard, and there's guys, there's three bonfires going, they're heating their coffee up and stuff. A couple cardboard shacks off in the corner. It was not what I pictured from what I had seen in prison movies. There's all these guys standing around. So I asked the sergeant, I said, what are all these guys just standing around for? What's going on here? He said, well, probably half of them are here to see you. Because I had the Walla Walla Union Bulletin had enhanced my reputation. And then Lieutenant Henderson and A.J. Crawley, the associate superintendent, had put out a memo saying that I was a grave escape risk because I was at O&I in the Navy, Office of Naval Intelligence. I did have a secret clearing, that's true. So I had gotten all this publicity from the prison itself. If it's put on a memo, it's true. If they put on a memo that your grandfather's really not dead, well, he's not dead. A memo, that's like the word from God. If it's on a memo, that's the way it is. So it's on this memo that I'm an escape risk, maybe belong to the Weatherman organization, bomb maker. It was really great reading. And so the sergeant explained, that's why most of the people are out here. As we're walking from the sally port to the clothing department, clothing room, it's probably block and a half. We're all walking kind of, not orderly, but kind of in a group, double file down the sidewalk. And there was a couple hippies in this group, and they had been going down the road in the Green Hornet, were singing, I fought the law and the law won, and put your hands in the hands of the man. Really, really great guys. So when they get there, they right off, guys start whistling, catcalling them. And they're the same age that I am, nobody's catcalling me or carrying on. But they're on to these two young guys, these two hippies. And one inmate from the crowd rushes in and gives the guy a swat on the rump and maybe a little grab. And I really felt bad for the guy because it scared him so bad he peed himself. So that's going to be bad from what I know now. So we get to the property room, we got our clothes, but we don't change clothes there. We have to stay in our coveralls, bus transportation clothes for the entire day. We'll get to wear our new clothes the following day. So everybody knows, oh, fish. So they take us to 4-wing. That's the receiving wing in the Washington State Penitentiary. And it has a breezeway that goes up and down and flattens back out. So if you're standing at the head of the breezeway, you can't see what's going on further down the breezeway because you get this hump. Kind of a poor layout. They called this breezeway had a name. We had lots of breezeways, but this one had a name, Blood Alley. And there was a reason. So as this one kid's going by the BPFU, Black Prisoners Forum Unlimited clubhouse, somebody races out there and they drug him in the clubhouse and he was gang raped and then tossed out on the sidewalk naked. That sends a bad. Well, the event is bad, but then to do that too just lets everybody know that, oh, okay, this guy's free game unless he goes and gets a knife and starts killing some people, or at least trying to kill them. This is what it's going to be for this guy for the rest of his time in prison. Because he can't go anywhere and be protected. They can put him in protective custody. That just means some badass rat up there is going to be having sex with a guy. There's no safety. You have to make your own safe part of your life. If you can't protect yourself, then you're just free game. And that was the first day.
Let's cut there.
Okay.
But there's not much that changed, though, between when Dick walked in and started working. It was pretty much all the same from about 1970 to 1980.
So I only have 2 more questions that are just for you before Dick gets on camera with you. And you started to touch on this, but I want to go into more detail about it. But there's that part in the book where you're talking about, you know, the reputation that you got before you were even there and how everybody thought you were badass and, you know, 90% of it wasn't actually accurate. They kind of took a little
Right.
kernel and made a whole story about it. So I want to go back to that, and you talked about it a little bit, but I just want you to just talk about that, go into a little bit more detail, because I think it shows, like, I mean, I see this where, I mean, it's like, I always said prison's like a you know, high school rumor mill. Like, it's just, there's limited
Oh, yeah.
information, so everybody's like,
Oh, it's all telephone. It's all,
what do you
like,
mean?
it's like you say one
The
thing.
game telephone.
It's the game
Right.
telephone, right? Where you start, you say something
Yeah.
on one end,
Yeah.
and then by the time it filters
I-
through
let's-
everybody,
these chairs right
Let's,
it's a
let's
completely
use this
different
bench
story.
right here. This weight bench shouldn't creak.
Or if you need one in the back, there's the chairs in
Yeah,
the bar.
I would have people come up to me at class
There
and
you go.
say,
That weight bench will work.
I heard
Part of
you
our
said
pattern,
da
too.
da 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 da, and I was like, I never said that. What are you talking about? And then I'd kind of trace the name of telephone backwards, and it would be like one thing I said to one
Right.
person.
And in the county jail, I had a deal with a guy named Jack Rodriguez. And he went to prison before I got there.
Oh, we didn't talk about that story. Yeah, I remember.
So that enhanced, that's firsthand
Yeah, that actually,
reputation.
that's a good. We should do that first. Actually, let's do that story first because that sets up the next story. Because of defending yourself, that leads into, right?
Right.
I forgot about that one. Okay, so, let me know when we're ready.
Yeah, no rolling.
So, tell us a story about being in county and mention county so it's a complete sentence. And
Okay.
what happened with Jack.
When I was in the Walla Walla County Jail, there was an inmate in there by the name of Jack Rodriguez. And Jack had got a really bum deal. He'd been at a bar, got in a fight with a guy. The guy says, I'm going to go home and kick your ass when I'm done drinking here. So Jack goes home. His 80-year-old mother's living in the house. So Jack goes home, gets a pistol, just in case the guy does come. Well, the guy does come and kicks the door in. Jack kills him. I would think that would probably be self-defense, but because Jack didn't call the police first and went home and got the gun, he took the law in his own hands. So they found Jack guilty of manslaughter. And with his previous record, he was sent to the penitentiary. But while we were in the penitentiary, Jack had a liking to younger guys, looking for sexual gratification. We had the dentist, this kid in there, he's like 19 or 20. And his mom and dad, they put him in there purposely, like, you're going to learn something here, because he kept getting into marijuana and they couldn't, get him off of it. So they're going to teach him a lesson. Well, he got taught a lesson all right. I remember visiting, we visited through this wire screen. We'd all be up, 3 or 4 of us at one time in a small wire screen visiting. And he tells his mom, they're treating me like a woman in here, Mom. And he was out that night. They posted bail immediately. I'm a firm believer you shouldn't send your kids in for those kind of lessons. So anyway, Jack, he's kind of nosing around thinking, well, Kelly, he's 22. Maybe he can put the pressure on me. And somehow, I don't know where he got it, but he had gotten a small knife. Stole it from mess hall or somewhere. But he had this small knife, so one day we're out on the tier, and all the cell doors in this cell house are welded open because there's no toilets in there. When it was built, you had a bucket, and they don't do that. So they got one toilet out in the middle of the breezeway. So Jack's telling me what I have to do. If not, there's going to be trouble. So he's walking slowly toward me, and I keep backing up. And then I get to the end of the cell block where you can't back up anymore. So I threw up my hands like, oh, well, I guess we'll have to do this. And when he got close enough, I have extremely long legs, you may have noticed. One kick to the kneecap, and he's down. Instantly. And in the movies, they jump back up. No, if you kick him in the knee, they don't jump back up. So he's on the ground. He dropped the knife. He forgot all about it. I jumped on him, grabbed a knife, and said, Jack, I'm going to make you a one-eyed Jack. Which one do you want to keep, the left or the right? And he started talking about, I was just testing you. I wasn't going to do anything. I told him, well, remember that, Jack. And remember this, too. A year ago, I was in Vietnam killing people. And I'm not afraid to kill somebody or to be killed. And after that, we got along fine. So he went to the penitentiary. Now, this is firsthand evidence. He's telling everybody, oh, yeah, this guy, he's right on, dude. He participated in the jailbreak, got the best of me. He should have got the best of me. Jack said, I did the wrong thing. I was uncalled for, bad judgment. So he was a nice guy. He got out, and I think he got killed in Yakima by the police.
And so now I want you to tell the part about your badass reputation and all the things that kind of went into that, and start with a sentence about that.
Well, when I went to trial, they searched my house, of course, numerous times. I was into black powder rifles. So you have black powder, because you can't shoot them without black powder. And then in the basement, we had the usual tank of plumbing supplies, pipe caps, and this and that. So in court, it was suggested that I was also an experienced bomb maker, because I had all this bomb-making devices, material in the basement. Anybody that's in the black powder guns is going to have that same material. So now I get tagged, a bomber. He's probably been with the weatherman, that type of stuff. Oh, and I had supposedly had several submachine guns. I did have one semi-automatic rifle. But you couple all these things together, the attempted jailbreak, the incident with Jack Rodriguez, bomb making, etc. Got quite the reputation without even doing anything. And once they put that in a memo, it was like it was in concrete. Memo to the staff, watch this guy. He's an extreme escape risk, he's dangerous. So I got assigned to the control room as a control room clerk, because I could type. And I asked Lieutenant Dodd one time, why do you think I got that? And he said, well, they wanted to keep an eye on you. No better way to keep an eye on somebody to have you sitting right across the desk from them. So that was my introduction to the penitentiary.
Cut.
sound.
So tell us a little bit about your relationship with Jim Fogel and David Reel, and start with the full sentence so we have their names and stuff.
When I moved out of Four Wing into the main population, I moved in with two guys named David Reel and Jim Fogel. Jim Fogel is famous for writing Drugstore Cowboy. And we got to know each other because they worked out in the engineering department and I worked out there for George Wales also. At that time, I was being taught how to work on electrical stuff and ended up being the emergency electrician for the penitentiary for several years. But the neatest thing about living with Jim and Dave, every night they'd be rehashing. They were crime partners. They'd be rehashing this crime or that crime. David might say, "Yeah, Jim, tell them about the bird's nest on the ground we found up in the Waitsburg. They were safe crackers. These guys cracked safes, and they enter through the roof." So a lot of times the damage done to the building was more than they got away with. But yeah, they could open a safe, no problem. So it was always pretty entertaining. And then Jim was always working on a book. We all know Jim Fogel for Drugstore Cowboy. And then he had another great book, Satan's Sandbox, about when he served time in San Quentin. I've always looked for that to become a movie. So we'd critique it. In fact, one time we were sitting in there and Jim was telling us what he'd written. I don't know, I just came to me, I said, "Geez, Pard, you're making it sound like some old blue-haired granny's writing this. You gotta get back on track. You're an armed robber, dude." Things like that would go on. And they were both drug addicts, really into speed. We call it speed back then. They call it meth today. They were always looking for ways to smuggle stuff into the penitentiary. And Jim Fogel's outlook on serving time, when he was serving time, that's his job. When he's released, that's his vacation. And he likes robbing drugstores. And he told me one time, when you go on vacation, if you like fishing, you go fishing, right? I like robbing drugstores. I go to the drugstores. And they all armed robberies. And David Reel was really good at playing chess. I'm fairly good. But he'd get high on the speed, and he thought he was really good then. He could never beat me when he was on the speed. But yeah, they were great guys. Last time I saw Jim Fogel was over in Connell, Coyote Ridge, I believe. He was in a wheelchair. It was pretty sad. He'd come down with lung cancer. Probably caught it from being incarcerated in those cell blocks all those years, because there's a lot of asbestos in the old cell wings, cell blocks.
Cut. Rolling on sound. Okay. I'm gonna cough real quick. Excuse me. Okay.
So, Kelly, do you
Wait,
remember Jimmy Carlisle?
leave,
Oh, yeah.
leave a little more space there to start.
Okay, hold on.
So, Kelly, do you remember Jimmy Carlisle?
Oh yeah, Jimmy Carlisle was a good, upstanding brother in the bike shop. He'd been in there, several years. I remember one incident with Jimmy. He had been having some events with this black guy that worked in the kitchen. This guy's, I don't know what the guy's real name was, but he was known as the Cannibal.
I remember.
Because when they
him.
arrested him over in Seattle, he had this bag and it had some human fingers in it that had been gnawed on. And so he's obviously not quite there, but he's at the penitentiary anyway. So him and Jimmy had gotten into it a couple of times. So one Friday we're going down to the movie house, and we had just, when I say we, there was Flint, Pineapple, myself, and Blinky, and Jimmy Carlisle. So we just got the reason I remember that so well, I just bought a round of sodas, 5 sodas, spent 50 cents. So we were just starting down Blood Alley. And there's a Cannibal. He's got his back up against the wall. He's just standing there with his hands down to his side. And then probably 10 feet further down the breezeway is the entrance to the BPFU, Black Prisoners Forum Unlimited Clubhouse. So as we walk past Jimmy Carlisle, when Jimmy Carlisle walks past the cannibal pulls out a long knife and jumps behind him and stabs him like right at the neck, down through his abdomen here, just missed his heart. Now we're lucky, the hospital is just right across from where this happens. So Jimmy gets stabbed, he falls to the ground. Flint pulls out a long knife, sword, I'd call it a Roman short sword.
Yeah.
And Pineapple, he pulls out these nunchucks, so and he's really good at it. So they start wailing on the cannibal to get him off of Jimmy. And the cannibal jumps up and runs into the BPFU clubhouse. And he's just throwing blood because he gets smacked up pretty good. So a whole bunch of his club members come running out of the BPFU hall. And Flint and Pineapple are able to push them back into their clubhouse, which used to be cell block 1. And cell block 1 has real narrow doors. Only one person at a time can go through there, that was a big plus. And the door swings out. So as soon as they're in there, been chased back into the clubhouse, me and Blinky, we raced over, pushed that door shut, and wedged ourselves against it. And they can only get one person to that door at a time pushing. So there's 2 of us holding it and one person pushing, trying to get the door open. So we were really fortunate that had the old prison design door on it. So while we're holding the door, Pineapple and Flint, they grab Jimmy and drag him. Jimmy's a big boy. You're not carrying him, you're dragging him as fast as they can to the hospital. And he survived. And they hollered, as soon as they get almost to the hospital, they holler down to us, okay, let him go. We let him go. The door swings out this way. So I raced down to 6th Wing. I'm not sure which way Blinky went. When I went into 6th Wing, I told the sergeant, better lock the doors, there's trouble. He didn't call the control room or anything. He said, oh, lock the doors. And 6th Wing was predominantly where most of the black members lived at the time.
You know that when I started work, that happened in Blood Alley. And Blood Alley was such a scary place for staff because it was chock full of inmates that were called residents at the time.
Right.
And you had almost a half mile to walk from beginning to end that felt like forever. And you described it earlier as having a hump. You couldn't see the end, one end to the other because of the elevation change in the walkway, breezeway. And we were trained when we started. The sergeant told me, you stop by the control room before you go down to 4 Wing, which is at the far end, and tell them you're going to call them in 5 minutes because you're going in Blood Alley. And if you don't hear from me, call the gurney and a goon squad to come after me. And that's how scary it was for staff.
Oh, I can imagine.
To have to negotiate that.
And the way this alley or breezeway is manufactured, it has a tin roof, then it has chain link fence on one side
Brick
and
wall
brick
on the,
wall on the other side. So there's no climbing out of this. You're in this channel.
you're trapped.
Yeah, you either fight your way
Literally.
back out or fight your way down, and you never know, 4 Wing might be locked down if trouble's coming, or 5 Wing.
And the Black Prisoners Forum United or Unlimited, BPFU,
Right.
They would play with staff and block the Blood Alley to see if you had the heart to elbow your way through them. And you just had to suck it up and push your way through them. It was a scary place.
So after this event, like I said before, most of the black people lived in 6 Wings, but there was a fair amount lived in 8 Wing, and there was a fair amount of white people also lived in 6 Wing. So after this incident here, the heads all got to bike shop and the BPFU got together and they did a housing exchange. So if you were black in 8 Wing, you could move into a white guy's cell in 6 Wing, and that guy could in turn move to your cell that was in 8 Wing. So everybody got their property. Nobody got ripped off. Because all the cells at this time belong to the inmates. They don't belong to the staff. So it's their property. So nobody got ripped off of any property, and that helped feelings quite a bit. And that's when me and Jim Fogel moved to 8 Wing.
Now, the story was you would have more of the inside true story, but 14B and 8 Wing was supposedly the highest rent in all of 8 Wing, and 14B went for $1,400 a month for a bunk. I don't. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I can't remember who was living there, but it was pretty,
Voices on like, oh shit.
pretty,
Alright. We're rolling right now.
I'm gonna cut. It's cut.
Yeah.
Rolling on sound.
So pick it back up with rent for a bunk in 8 Wing.
So I don't know if you can validate this or not, but the story was with staff that 14B 8 Wing was going for $1,400 a month for a bunk in a 4-man cell. Does that sound right to you?
yeah, I had heard reports that, I couldn't remember the number of the cell block, but there was one on B that for some reason was bringing big money. And you go back for 13 cells to B1, you got Nancy and Dino
Right.
running a Chinese laundry in there, so the high humidity,
Right.
always smells soapy water. So I could never see what the attraction was on B Wing or down there for all these people to pay that much money, but it's not uncommon. All the cells at this time belonged to somebody. In fact, there was people out on the streets that were getting payments for their cell. If you didn't make them, you're going to move or get hurt. It was serious business. You could just go into the assignment lieutenant and ask to move into a cell. He either had to contact the people who lived in that cell, or you had to bring in a note saying they could move in there.
Boy, it's triggering some memories. 14B was occupied by Sam somebody and Bob Runge. I don't know.
Oh, Bob, yeah,
Yeah.
Bob Runge.
And
Bob liked those younger kids.
evidently, yeah. But Dean Bolstad in cell 1B,
Right.
I remember him leaving 8 Wing to go out on the streets. He was paroling. And I asked him, I said, Dean, what are you going to do on the streets? And you got a job? He goes, no, but, you know, I can always run down to the Arctic Circle and get a 19-cent hamburger. And I go, oh, Dean, that times have
Maybe back
changed.
then.
You're not going to get a
No.
19-cent hamburger. The next time I saw him, he had been run in from the streets because Charles Campbell had committed his murders, and they had snatched up every lifer off the streets and sent them back to prison to have their sentence reviewed. And Dean was telling me that, man, I had a job, I got a family, everything was fine. They knocked on the door, and here I am.
Well, that's sad.
Yep.
Sorry, cut.
Rolling on sound.
He was there in the early 70s.
So Dean told me that if he needed to, he could always go out and get a 19-cent hamburger. And I told him, oh, Dean, it's been a long time since you could buy a 19-cent hamburger. And I thought to myself, this guy's got no idea what he's going to meet out on the street. And the next time I saw him, he had been gaffled up off the streets and run back to prison when Charles Campbell had committed his murders and caused such a media stir that the department ran all the lifers that had been paroled back to prison to reevaluate their release on parole.
What year was that?
That, well, he came back probably, I don't know when Campbell committed his murders. I think it was 79, 80,
something like that.
somewhere in there. Yeah.
All right, we're just gonna cut there now.
I know you got an 8-minute limit there. And
Yeah.
Rolling on sound.
You know, in around 1970, I was still a kid in school, and that was, you know, right when Dr. Conti's influence came in on the corrections area. I distinctly remember being in the living room when my dad had a visitor come from the penitentiary, and he was a lieutenant, and he was complaining a lot about how policies were going to change. And I distinctly remember him saying, "I'm telling you, Dick, I'm Dick Jr., my dad was Dick Sr., and my dad was an officer at the pen. But the lieutenant told my dad, we're going to go just the way California did." And he was referring to liberalized views of the penitentiary. And I know I've heard you mention Dr. William Conti before. I don't know what you guys thought initially, but it was definitely bad news from the officer's perspective.
Oh, I would imagine.
Yep.
Yeah, the good doctor, he got in there, I think around 1967 or 68.
70 is what I heard.
Early 70, yeah. Either the end of the 60s or 70. Somehow he just came across this plan that they were using in a Scandinavian country to run prisons. And their thought was, let the prisoners run the inside of the institution, and the guard's job is to keep anybody from leaving before their time is up.
Yeah.
So this got the doctor's interest. He sends B.J. Ray, sometimes referred to as the Emperor. B.J. Ray had total power. He could do anything he wanted. It was like his own medieval kingdom before this big change comes in. And the way he hooks B.J., because I asked B.J. one time, I said, how did this happen? How did you get on board? And B.J. told me, originally the plan was sold to me that the prison would become self-sufficient, that they'd build mattresses and they'd build furniture, and they'd turn this big farm into a huge farm, productive, and that would be sold to other institutions, which would cut all the budget for the penitentiary. That's how they hooked BJ. So BJ, he goes over there and he sees, yeah, the inmates are running it. It seems to be working pretty good. But what no one thought about was the psychological differences between American inmates and European inmates. Europeans are much nicer people than we are. You can see that in this COVID thing, unless you go to Australia. It's gotten out of hand in Australia, but you can see how they handle the COVID and stuff. It's different. They're just nicer. They seem to be nicer people than we are. So that's why it's not going to work. We're selling matching cats to dogs. It's not going to work. And at first, it didn't work well at the penitentiary. When BJ announced that we're going to do away with the con boss system, that's a system where there's about 40 long-term inmates serving life sentences generally, and they control the penitentiary. If you wanted to work in the kitchen, you had to go see the con boss that was in charge of the kitchen. It wasn't the assignment lieutenant that chose you to go there. You'd have to go check with this guy. They had a lot of power. And that power means money, drugs, you name it. So the first thing BJ had to do was break that system up because they were bucking him. They were like, no, we're not going to do that. No. This is the way we're going to be. So I don't know if it was BJ's idea to come up with the clubs based on culture, or he's the one that implemented it. I don't know where the idea came from. So we have all these clubs drawn up. We have the Lifers Club and a bunch of clubs based on racial, like Indians, Chicanos, blacks. And then you had the bike shop. What made the bike shop so strong was they were diversified. We had white members, we had black members, we had Asian members. We were diversified. And being diversified like that made that small club, generally 30 members, so powerful they could control that institution. Being diversified is a good, real good thing. So they finally get the clubs going, and then we have a sit down. Well, basically the inmates decided, you want to meet these demands or we're just going to stay home. Staying home is stay in your cell. And it's pretty much known that if you come out of your cell and break this strike, there's going to be serious trouble. So everybody just stays home because they don't want to, get wrapped up in that. And that means there's hundreds of TV dinners. That means overnight you can't go to Walla Walla and buy a TV dinner because they're gone. Every store's gone for the emergency start, and then DOC will start buying them from the vendors. But to start with, they got to clean the local groceries out to get these TV dinners, and they feed them TV dinners twice a day and a sandwich for lunch. And that puts a tremendous strain on the system. So once they started having the sit-downs, the strikes, the inmates realized they had really, really good control, because this was costing everybody a lot of money, and it was bad publicity for DOC.
I have a slightly different take on how things slid. Is that one of the issues around Conte's philosophy was to teach the inmates democracy and the responsibility that goes with democracy. So although you had powerful clubs, what evolved was a governmental body for the inmate population. It was called the Resident Government Council, or RGC. And they held elections. All the inmates could vote for whoever they wanted to have as president in the various subordinate offices of a government. And those, well, the way I express it is, if you've got a community that is 100% criminal and you hold an election, what would you expect to wind up being elected to highest office? The toughest, meanest, or most canny individuals of the population wound up being in the RGC. Or you would have these powerful inmate groups and clubs and gangs. They would put a puppet up for election, and they would be serving a group as opposed to the population. So supposedly, under Dr. Conte's model, you would have a democratically elected governing council that would interact with the administration over policies and procedures. Instead, like Kelly indicated, you wound up with the inmates deciding, we're not going to cooperate with nothing. This is what we want to eat. This is how much time out of our cell we're going to have. And you can't search my cell unless you have somebody from the RGC witness the search. There were places that I, as an officer, couldn't go unless an inmate with a key unlocked the door, or the padlock and chain, for example. Couldn't get into the Lifers Club unless a lifer or RGC member was there to open the door. So that's kind of how I thought it slid off the rails, was through this democratic principle of managing prison policy and negotiating with the inmates over what was appropriate policy and what wasn't.
And had it stayed on track, it might have actually worked. But as soon as we had groups of inmates that became powerful, that you can't just run for RGC president without someone's permission.
Right.
And so that's what killed that concept about democracy.
'Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was going to ask. I'm out of it as far as that topic goes.
Cut.
That was a perfect last.
So we had this great,
Stop. Rolling audio.
right? Oh. So we had this great experiment that went on for 10 years. And one of the things that came with that experiment, there were hundreds, literally hundreds of people suffered bodily harm, and some were murdered for no reason at all because of this experiment. This caused many people to endure real tragedy. Jim Spalding said one time, in that time period, that if every inmate that served from 1970 to 1980 was given $1 million, that would be insufficient compensation for the terror they had to live with. And every day, you didn't know. If you were in a bike shop, you had a better chance, maybe not getting knifed down for no reason, but every given day, you had no idea what was going to happen. And you knew every day some bad things were happening.
You know, I don't think you were there, Kelly, when Spalding. When did you leave?
I left in 1981, March.
Oh, well, you were there for Saturday Night Live, but you were
Oh,
in
yeah.
6 Wing, right?
No, 8 Wing. I transferred to 8 Wing a long time
Okay,
before that.
you were there. All right.
Right.
Well,
And that started-
Spalding had said that things were going to change at the penitentiary, and he was quoted in the paper that taking anything away from a convict is like taking something away from a junkyard dog. And that was very prophetic, because after Sergeant Bill Cross was murdered, we went on lockdown, and which led up to Saturday Night Live, which was 7/7/79. Saturday night, that was when the 8 Wing riot happened during a lockdown, because we were locked down because of the Bill Cross murder. And that night, they had tore up, destroyed 72 out of 108 cells in 8 Wing. So all of the men had to be taken out to the big yard. Well, by the time they got down out to the big yard, it might have gotten down to 85 degrees. It was a very hot night. And that was, if you asked an inmate who was there before the lockdown and is still doing time, that inmate would tell you that the penitentiary never came off lockdown. That was the stark difference between the Dr. Conte years and post-Conte years, was that staff got control back from the inmates of how the prison was going to be run. There was, unfortunately, Sergeant Cross had to die, and before him, Lieutenant Saunders was killed. So you were talking about the grief that was experienced. There was a high price that staff paid as well.
Oh, exactly.
Yep.
I remember that guy that jumped off of a tier in 4 Wing. There was 2-tiered cell, landed on poor Officer Lang's neck and broke. It didn't paralyze him, but all those weird things were always happening. At that time, 4 Wing was the ding wing. It's just one of those deals. But Spalding, he was. I would say he was definitely a genius on how he handled his transition, because nobody got killed after they locked down. Nobody got beat up to speak of. I mean, it was a real major feat. The man was a genius at stopping that. Because
Well,
it could have gotten real, real ugly.
well, it did get ugly. There were accusations of Carl Harp being
Right.
raped with a nightstick, a baton, when he was being extracted from a cell during a disturbance in his unit. And those accusations and the officers being assigned to home provoked a wildcat strike in which I think it was 49 officers were fired for refusing to go to work. So there was Spaulding was masterful in handling that. He basically said, you don't work, you get fired. And those guys went to roll call, turned their back on the lieutenant, and walked off the job, and Spaulding fired him.
So you mentioned 2 different officers that were murdered. Can you say a little bit more about what happened?
Actually, let's take a break there. I'm gonna switch out this car.
Okay.
Cut.
Kind of went
Rolling sound.
Sergeant Cross got killed out in front of the chow hall. The Indians and Mexicans had a war going on, and so the Indians and the Mexicans were all packing knives, shanks, whatever you want to call them. And Sergeant Cross went up to an Indian and said, I want to shake you down. The Indian said, no, I'm packing. And I wish Sergeant Cross would have just backed off, because it's a very dangerous situation, but he felt he was doing his job, so he told the Indian again, no, I got to pat you down. Now, if the inmate had any sense, he would just let the officer pack him down and take the beef for the shank, but instead he pulled the shank out and killed Sergeant Cross. So the institution is ordered locked down. We're all in our cells, and somewhere about 10:30 in 8 Wing, Harpo, inmate up on one of the top tiers, he's plugged his toilet and he's letting the water run over and then out and down, cascading off the tiers to the main floor. And everybody else thinks that's a cool idea, so they start doing it. So the story I was always told is an officer gets a hold of the guy down in the basement who controls all the electrical and water and everything, engineering tunnel. You get a hold of that guy and tell him, turn the water off. That stops the flooding, right? Well, and then someone said, if we don't have water, we don't need toilets. In 8 Wing, most of the toilets in 8 Wing were porcelain, just like the one right in this bathroom here. So you could break them off pretty easy. The new ones, stainless steel, solid one piece, they're pretty hard to get off the wall. So the inmates just started ripping off their toilets and breaking them. Now you can't stay in that wing because there's no toilet sanitation for that many people. Nothing you can do. And that's what let us be transported out to the big yard for 30 days.
Now, I remember about a year prior to that, Lieutenant Roger Saunders was murdered, and the way that occurred was an officer was doing a search in the education department on the floor above and found a pipe with caps on it hidden in the false ceiling in one of the classrooms. He took the pipe and he delivered it to the control room, which is the lieutenant's desk is right next to the control room. Dropped the pipe off at the control room, which has a Dutch door. And the Dutch door, the control room sergeant handed the pipe to the lieutenant. He took the pipe, took one cap off, nothing came out of the pipe. He put the cap back on, took the other cap off, and a little bit of black powder spilled out. And the sergeant in the control room reportedly said, "Roger, would you quit fucking with that thing?" and Roger took that cap he had in his hand, put it back on, gave it an extra twist, and it exploded. Took his hands off and disemboweled him, and I believe he survived for something like 21 days and dying of peritonitis eventually. It was a horrible death, affected staff. That was the moment that staff realized they, meaning inmates, can kill you. And so it kind of caused a relationship change between staff and inmates, I thought.
Yeah, Lieutenant Saunders was really a nice guy,
He was.
it's sad to see anybody lose their life, but Sergeant Cross, another great guy. And there's some other officers, I wouldn't give any names, that were not really nice guys. But yeah, these two men, they were fine examples of correctional officers.
And to this day, any staff member that worked back then would say Dr. Conti is to blame.
Right? He set this entire experiment into motion by sending B.J. Ray to Europe. And it so quickly got out of control. I hear people talk, oh, well, where we're at now, this could never happen again. I saw it. It could change so quickly. With the wrong decision made at the top, we could be back in Concrete Mama tomorrow. That's what's scary. It might take longer than just tomorrow, but it could happen.
When I graduated from high school in 1972, that's the same year that my dad decided to retire, he stuck a finger in my face and said, "Boy, don't you ever go to work at the pen. It's going to hell in a handbasket." And I said, "Don't worry, Dad, I'm going to be an attorney."
But the department's lucky that there's people like Dick that stepped in to fill some of these shoes. Because effective leadership is what works at the penitentiary level.
Well, I was a reluctant recruit. The only
But still,
reason
you had
I
the
went
skills to do it.
Yeah, the only reason I went to work at the pen was because unemployment was running out, and there's not a lot of places to work in Walla Walla in 1975, and I was forced to fill out applications for every place, the penitentiary being the last one. And I never mentioned that my dad and grandfather had worked at the pen or anything, and I had no idea that in 1975 the turnover at the penitentiary for officers was over 50% per year. There was no way I was not going to get a job. And that's how I wound up at the pen.
And James Spaulding started out the same exact way. His dad had been in corrections. I think his dad was captain in Deer Lodge, Montana.
Yep.
Come from a correctional family, entered in, wasn't going to do it for long term, just something to fill in. And the department ended up getting that highly effective leader.
Cut.
Rolling sound.
So when I entered the penitentiary, they had all these newly formed clubs. I got in there about 2 years after the clubs had been formulated. The Chicanos, they had their own club, Mexican Americans. Lifers had their club. You had to be a lifer to join in. That's the first club I joined, was lifers, since I had this wonderful life sentence. And you had the black prisoners. They had a club called the BPFU. We had the Alcoholic Anonymous. We had the Washington State Penitentiary Automotive Club. All you had to do is have an interest in cars, and you could join that.
Don't forget the clipped wings.
All right, we had the clipped wings. And then we had the Gay Liberation Army. And then we had the bike club. And I've been a biker all my life. At an early age, I broke one of the Harley Davidson's records, riding a motorcycle 25,000 miles in 1 year. Nowadays, that's nothing, but back then, the bikes we had back in the middle 60s, That was a feat, evidently. And I've been motorcycling ever since. 2 years ago, I rode from Spokane, Washington to the Arctic Ocean. That's a 6,000-mile round trip venture, 1,200 miles of gravel road. So I've been into motorcycles all my life. I design parts for motorcycles, accessories. So that's how I got hooked into the motorcycle shop. They were looking for members. They were small. Starting out, they were small. I think six guys started it. And the requirement to be in the bike shop is you had to be a patch holder. It means like the colors are on the back of a motorcyclist's jacket. You see them out on the streets. Those are patch holders. That's their patch. So if you were a patch holder out on the street, you're an automatic member in the bike shop. If not, then you had to prospect to prove that you were worthy to join the bike shop. That weeded out a lot of people. Myself, I was made an honorary member in about 73, just because I was an emergency electrician, so I could do a lot of stuff for them. If you needed an extra outlets put in, I could do all that. So that's how I basically ended up joining. Then in I think like 1975, there was talk about, well, you need to go become a full member. And I told him, well, I'm going to school, I'm an emergency electrician. I couldn't really be a prospect and give it the justice that should be given. And someone said, you don't have to prove anything. You've been with us for 3 years. See, the prospect thing is to prove if you are actually worthy. And so that day I was voted in as a full member. Then about a year later, we got a new bike shop president, Mike Abrams. This guy is really dynamic. It's a shame he's a drug addict, but he's really dynamic. And he puts together a program. He wants to start teaching a lot of these wannabes. Wannabes are people that are in the bike shop, but they've never ridden a motorcycle. He wants to start teaching them how to ride a motorcycle, how to repair a motorcycle. So one meeting, Mike Abrams says, is there anybody in here that could type? I learned how to type in high school. One of the best things I ever learned in high school was to learn how to type. And I raised my hand and said, yeah, I could type. And Mike says, is there anybody else? And Roger Saul and a guy we called Little Bit raised his hand and said, okay, you guys are on the PR committee. Kelly's going to be in charge here. What we're going to do, we're going to write every elected state official a letter telling about we're starting this school. We're going to train members to be repair motorcycles, take care of motorcycles. And we're looking for their support. And then we're going to write all these motorcycle shops saying, hey, we need donations so we can start building motorcycles, teaching these guys a trade. And this is costing the taxpayers not a dime, at least not a dime they can see. So we have Supreme Court justices coming in. That's pretty good. Supreme Court justice comes in, administration building unannounced and said, I'd like to see the bike shop. I guess, as you know, the higher up you go, unfortunately, there's a lot of politics involved. Yes. That gets things really rolling. So we wrote all these letters. None of them were Xeroxed. None of them were carbon copies. They were all hand typed over and over and over again, because that gives you that personal effect. And sure enough, donations started pouring in. Guys started building motorcycles. I built 2 there. And once a week, sometimes twice a week, we could take all of our bikes out during the 4 o'clock count when all the other inmates are locked up for 4 o'clock count. We could go out and ride our bikes around the big yard. It's about a 3 to 5 acre compound. Yeah. And that was a lot of fun. In fact, it was so great. At one point, I wanted to go see the Harley Davidson dealer in Pasco. And I had my bike all running. And they said, well, we can't just let you go over there. You have medium custody. You have to be with an officer. An officer, Mark Locos, volunteered to go. So he's gonna drive the bike and I'll be the passenger. Well, we get out through the 6 Tower gate there, and it's obvious that no, we're not getting to Pasco with this guy driving. So as soon as we got out of sight, I said, okay, pull over, swap out. He was more than ready, because it was hand shift, foot clutch, something you're not really used to in modern day motorcycling. And then we went to Pasco and back. This is a guy with a life sentence that the parole board in 1980 said you need to do 30 more years. But yet I'm trusted to go off and on a motorcycle, go to Pasco and come back.
You know, the clubs, all of them, in their charter and in their correspondence.
Kelly,
Oh,
you're,
sorry.
you're scratching your.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
Did you stop it?
Like-
No, I never
Okay,
hit it.
let's keep rolling. Hold on a second. Dick.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to cut Dick there.
You know, all of the clubs all had charters, and they communicated with politicians with expressing all of these rehabilitative goals that their clubs had, whether it was to teach cultural issues that as these inmates had been raised, maybe they had lost their cultural identity or whatever it was that the clubs supported. But from the perspective of the staff, they were criminal organizations founded and intended to carry out criminal goals in the prison. And honestly, I think we all felt that the politicians had been duped. So there was a lot of tension between the clubs and the staff, but at the same time, we also used those clubs to help manage the population. As an 8-wing sergeant, I would go to Mike Abrams, the president of the bike shop. 8-wing was famous for being the home of most of the bikers, and say at 9 o'clock, I'm supposed to have every inmate in their cell. At about 8:55, I've got all of the bike shops standing outside of their cells and a whole bunch of other inmates milling about, and I would go to Mike and say, so what's it going to be, Mike? Are we locking up tonight or what? He would look at his watch and he'd say, oh my, Morgan, didn't realize it was that late. And he'd holler to you or one of the other officers of the club and said, lock up. And the entire wing would lock up within 5 minutes without me having to say anything to anybody. That was typical that where you were at, you had to rely on these clubs to help you manage the population, to keep the peace or whatever. I felt it was like dealing with the devil, to tell you the truth. But that's the way it was. It was another artifact of the Conti years.
Yeah, that's pretty well sums it up. When I did that PR thing for the bike shop, about a month after that, when things were kicking in, Mike Abrams said, I need an external vice president, because we had an internal vice president, so we want two. He said, I want Kelly to be that guy. That's how I became vice president of the bike shop, was recognition for the work we'd done on the PR system. Oh, I thought one more thing.
That's why I wait, because
Yeah.
I'm like, they're gonna come out with the gems.
And Dick talked about how the bike shop would round them up in 8-wing and get them back in their cells. Well, one day, Jim Spalding calls me to his office. I go in and see what he wants. He says, I got these guys, these 2 reporters from the Walla Walla Union Bulletin. They want to come up here and do a book type deal. But here's the catch. They don't want any officers to go with them. I can't send those guys in there. Something bad could happen to them. I said, well, so? What do you want me to do, Jim? He said, I was thinking, if a couple of you bike shop guys, you just kill some time and go walk around with these guys, we'd probably have no problem. I'd feel good about that. So I told him, yeah, we'll put something together for you. I think sometimes McCoy and Hoffman didn't even know they had somebody there. And went around.
You know, in the front of Concrete Mama, the book that they ultimately wrote,
Hold on, Dick. Hold that thought and restate that just 1 second, because I want that context that you're talking about Concrete Mama.
You know, those two people that were escorted around to observe the inmates without staff being with them ultimately wrote the book Concrete Mama. And in the front of that book, it talks about how they, I believe it was on A deck where the bikers lived, that they had stepped into the cell and the officer, who was not named, rolled the door shut and left them in there for a long period of time. I confess, I was the officer that locked them
Oh,
up
that's
in the
good.
cell.
I'll have to remind John about that the next time I talk to John. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, true story.
But by having that kind of chaperones, they got a lot of pictures they might not have gotten. The shower picture at 8 Wing is one of them. First, the guys are screaming, "Hey, get out of here! You can't." I explained to them how important this could be to the bike shop and everybody else to get some positive input in the world out here. And talk about input. At one time, B.J. Race featured in Life magazine that this experiment was the best thing that ever happened to American corrections.
That's true. And as far as locking them two up in a cell, it was
Good.
just to give them the genuine perspective of what prison life could be like. As an officer, it didn't happen a lot, but every once in a while you would accidentally get locked in a cell with inmates. You're in there doing a security check. You tell the guys that are laying on a bed, "Stay put, I just got to check things out." There was a pretty trusting relationship individually between inmates and staff. If you knew the guy, you could turn your back on him and carry on your duties. That all changed after a couple staff members get murdered, but even then, if you accidentally got locked in a cell with inmates in the cell, you could see this funny smile come on their face saying, "We could have you." And it was a message that was never lost on me. I thought they should experience that.
Was it 7 Wing that B.J. Ray went into Sallyport and fired a shotgun off down the tier?
No, I think that I've
was
heard
that
the
8 Wing?
story. I think it was 8, but
Hey,
I'm
that's
not
what I always
sure.
thought too, but somebody told me not lately it was 7 Wing.
It's kind of hard
Because in
for
8
me.
Wing you can go down B tier and there are some pock marks in the
Right.
bricks at the end of the.
Right.
So I think it was. 8
That's the
Wing.
story I heard. Is that
Yeah, that's the
those-
one I'd always heard too,
Yeah.
till recently.
Alright, cut,
Rolling on sound.
and we're gonna talk straight to this lens.
My name is Dick Morgan. I'm retired from the Washington State Penitentiary.
It's alright.
Say
Wait.
that
Oh,
again.
sorry.
Yeah, no pressure.
My name is Richard Morgan, retired from the Washington State Department of Corrections. I have almost 40 years with the department. I started out as an officer, promoted to sergeant, lieutenant, captain, associate superintendent, eventually became superintendent of 3 different prisons, became the director of the Division of Prisons, and ultimately spent a year as secretary for the department.
Rolling on sound.
My name's Kelly Messinger, and I did 10 years in the Washington State Penitentiary, a maximum security penitentiary, for a crime which I did not commit. I was lucky that the governor investigated my case and ordered me released. I'm the author of Walls of Secrecy, a book that tells about the horrors and trials and tribulations that could be found at the Washington State Penitentiary between 1970 and 1980. This is one of those stories that's is stranger than fiction, but it's 100% truthful. The people that endured that I don't know how they endured it, but they were forced to endure it, and it should never ever happen again.
Let's do it one more time.
Okay.
Do a short version too without the last part.
No, we're still rolling.
Sound is rolling
I want
again.
two versions. I want
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want that version. that
and then
you
the short
said,
version.
Then the
Got it.
shorter version
Yeah,
is just
just your
analysis. Yeah.
just your credentials.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And ready whenever you are, Kelly.
I'm ready. My name is Kelly Messinger. I'm the author of Walls of Secrecy. I'm a psychologist, and this is my story.
Do it again. I want you to say like I was at the Washington. I was incarcerated
okay.
at the
For a
Washington
crime,
State
yeah.
Penitentiary for 10 years for a crime I did not commit, and I'm the author of Walls of Secrecy.
All right.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay.
My name's Kelly Messinger, and I served 10 years at the Washington State Penitentiary for a crime which I did not commit. I'm the author of Walls of Secrecy, which tells that story.
Cut.
Rolling on sound.
Well, Dick, when I was at the penitentiary, we had this third floor mental health department up there. And we heard a lot of rumors about the good doctor was actually torturing people. Like he had assistants his assistants were actually inmates that were deemed crazy or mentally ill, and he would have them do all manner of physical torture to other inmates.
You're not the only one to have heard that. I actually lived some of it. And that when I was a brand new officer, I went to roll call where you get your assignment for the day. Where are you going to work, for example? And the lieutenant said, "Morgan, you're going to the third floor." I was brand new, but I'd been there long enough to know that the third floor officers had previously not been allowed to go up there. It was prohibited. It was Dr. Hunter's program, and you had to have permission before you could go up there. There were staff up there. There were clinical mental health professionals that were assigned there, usually only one, and the rest were inmate attendants that were given kind of clinical supervision over the patients that were on the third floor of the hospital. So I asked the lieutenant, I said, "Third floor, what am I supposed to do?" He says, "Well, take the keys from the mental health guy and just walk around and see if there's anybody with bruises or black eyes or if they've got anything to say." Well, okay. So I went up to the third floor, came out, and was immediately, there was iron gate with bars between the elevator landing and the third floor. And the technician, medical professional was there, and he's holding his keys out saying, "I was expecting you, here's your keys." And he's obviously angry. And I said, "Okay, thanks." Let myself in through the door and said, "Do you have officer station someplace I can go?" And he said, "Well, you can come in the office." And I sat down there, and one of the inmate attendants said, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" Well, I was new, but I knew you didn't let inmates pour you a cup of coffee unless you were watching real close. But the coffee pot was right across from me, and I said, "Sure." So he poured me a cup of coffee, and "Anything else I can get for you?" Well, I was not used to being talked to like that by an inmate. And I said, "No, thanks." And then another attendant came up to me, the medical technician had wandered off somewhere. He said, "Don't go anywhere near," I'll have to use a bogus name here because he's still doing time, "Jones's cell. He'll try to kill you. Just don't get close to Jones's cell no matter what you do." I said, "Okay, I won't. Where's he at?" "Well, he's over in this cell over here." So I get bored of drinking coffee and nothing's happening. So I get up and I patrol just like you would in a wing or anywhere else and kind of do a security check. And I'm looking for black eyes, bruises, anything out of the ordinary. And I see a lot of inmates who are in cells who turn their back on me as soon as I show up. And it's obvious they're either afraid of me or they're afraid to talk to me. And I wasn't that experienced, but it was that clear. Then I come up on a cell where there's this older inmate who's bleeding from several scratch marks on his face. And I'd seen enough of mentally ill inmates to know that there's a lot of self-injury that goes on in a prison. But this was new. I'd never seen anybody scratch up their face like that. And I said, "What happened to you?" He said, "I can't talk to you. They'll kill me." And I go, "Well, okay, this guy's crazy, so, whatever." I said, "No, it's safe. There's nobody else here. They won't know. Talk to me." He says, "No, can't talk to you." He turns his back to me and he goes into the corner. He's got a mattress that's laying flat on the floor. And I finish my patrol and I go back to my chair and drink some more coffee. And well, what do I do with this? Is this serious? I don't know. And then I hear a commotion back towards where this cell is. Well, this man with scratches on his face, his name was Gardy Sailors. I didn't know it, but he was famous for being mentally ill. And he held the record for isolation time at the penitentiary. I was told it was 11 years straight of being in isolation. Didn't know a lot about isolation or time in isolation, but that certainly seemed amazing to me. So I went to go take a look at what was going on with Gardy Sailors.
Cut.
Does that work?
Yep.
Rolling on sound.
So in hindsight, I realized that by writing up the lieutenant and reporting what I saw and expressing my concerns, that I was going to be punished for that. And within days of that event, I wound up with a permanent assignment to 8 Wing, which had the reputation amongst staff being the lowest. It was built on the lowest elevation within the walls of the penitentiary. The saying was, if you're going to 8 Wing, it's because shit rolls downhill. And that if you're assigned to 8 Wing, you are on somebody's shit list. It was clear to me that I had done something I shouldn't have done. But at least Gardy Sailors lived through it, and so did I. It's also, I should say that the 3rd floor, although I was new, I was aware of the stories of Dr. Hunter's program, that the 3rd floor had this dark, secretive, malevolent aura around it, in that there, again, stories, nothing I personally witnessed, but there were stories of inmates committing suicide with ligature marks being found around their wrists, and inmates being found hanging with hands behind their back and being ruled a suicide. Were they just story? There were suicides on the 3rd floor for sure. There were some deaths up there. And people that work night shift would tell stories jokingly in very dark humor that they could hear assaults happening on the 3rd floor, but custody officers were prohibited from going up there. So whatever happened in Dr. Hunter's program. So Kelly, what did inmates know or think they knew
Well, we heard
about
a
the
lot
3rd
of
floor?
different stories. One, well, he was an escaped Nazi. It was that bad. And he believed in something called pain therapy. As a psychologist, I've never heard of it. It's in none of the books. But he believed if you hurt people, then they would get their demons out of them. And such as the scratching that Dick got to see, that Aid was carrying out pain therapy. Because Gordy had to be punished so he'd feel better.
Did you ever hear of the inmates who behaved irresponsibly while under Dr. Hunter's care, were put in diapers?
Right? We heard stories about inmates being put in diapers, tied to a bed, and cold sheets put over them with the air conditioning on. Typical things you'll read about at the camps in World War II. It's very, very disturbing. I know one inmate said he went to disciplinary, and they gave him a choice. I wish I knew who the officer was. They gave him a choice: 3rd floor or segregation. I'm going to seg, right?
That's a good point, because officers all knew that if you had to escort an inmate to the 3rd floor, you always told the inmate, we're going to the hole. And instead
Right.
of taking a left to go to the hole, you would go straight to the 3rd floor. And as soon as they realized it, you had a better than even chance of having a wrestling match on your hands.
Because people were dying up there. And they couldn't keep that as a secret. It's out. Somebody saw the body bag leaving, but it's never making the headlines because, like Dick said, they're always written off as suicides. I remember our prosecuting attorney, Arthur Eggers, who I knew really well. He was commenting about a, quote, suicide. His quote was, "It's a classic suicide, but those hands tied behind his back makes me a little, nervous. I wish his hands weren't tied behind his back, but it was a classic suicide." They did, because if you go down to court, in 10 years, numerous murder charges are filed against inmates with eyewitnesses 2-3 feet away, officers, free world people. And they're being tried in Whitman County and being found not guilty. When I was up there for 10 years, not one inmate was found guilty that I know of on a murder charge in the Walla Walla Superior Court, because they were told by Dr. Conti, don't worry about it. When that escape alarm goes off, you don't have anything to worry about. You weren't forced to be on some jury. We'll take care of it up here.
The prosecuting attorney, Art Eggers, actually made a formal announcement at one point that he was not going to try any more murder cases at the penitentiary, and we saw a tremendous spike in violence that coincided with that announcement.
Yeah, I saw Art. He'd come up and visit me about like twice a year. It's pretty strange relationship we had. And he told me one time, he said, I'd like to apologize. We're having cases found not guilty where it's obvious to anybody they did it. And you had so little evidence, and we found you guilty. And about 2 years before I got out, he came up, and I could see he was really troubled. And something just told me to give him a hug and put my arms around Art and said, hey, it's okay. What happened, happened. Mistakes will be made. He said that meant a lot to him. But it was dramatic. what was going on. It's just unbelievable.
One thing you haven't said yet is the connection between B.J. Ray and that Dr. what's his name was, or
Okay.
whatever that relationship was.
Right. But you go back to we go back to the third floor. The reason Dick got in trouble is his lieutenant was Lieutenant Glenn Henderson, who was directly related to B.J. Ray, the emperor of the compound. And so by bad things leaking out of what the third floor, that could get in the Walla Walla Union Bulletin and make the warden look bad. And the lieutenant was looking after him. One time the lieutenant was sent down to the property room for a new chain bus coming through, and he forgot to fingerprint them. Well, all he had to do is walk down 4-wing, that's where they're all at, and fingerprint them. He used his own fingerprints. FBI wanted to know, hey, you got 10 guys here, they all got the same prints.
So who was, like, when did Dr. Hunter get brought on, and what was that program? Like, where did that even start?
Well, it started when the state decided another great experiment. We're going to cut our population at the mental institutions. And so a lot of people are just dumped out on the street and they commit crimes. Well, you commit a crime, it's pretty hard to be found not guilty by reason of insanity. It's just, and these guys will plead guilty to anything. So you don't even have to take them to court. So once they're convicted, they're not going to Eastern State or Northern State Hospital. They're coming to the penitentiary. That's where the mental health unit was for criminals. And so once you went there, you were in deep trouble. Finally, the court closed them down, the 9th District, saying it was cruel and unusual punishment, and the penitentiary needed to downsize. They had a pretty lengthy ruling. It was primarily over the third floor, what was happening up there, and it just went away.
I really don't know when Dr. Hunter got extended or got started in his program. He was there when I got there, and after I got out of the third floor, I quit paying attention to it. I'd had my hands full in 8-wing. So I really don't know how his days ended.
No, they closed it down, and I don't know what happened to him. He was never charged with anything, or we would have known that.
Right.
So he just walked out of there. His great experiment. Another great experiment that had gone haywire. It cost people their lives, their physical health. Just another great experiment that went bad. You know, we look back through history, and a lot of people have dreams. Martin Luther King had a dream. It was a great dream. Adolf Hitler had a dream. Still had a dream, but it wasn't a great dream. And Dr. Connie had a dream. And it turned out to be a bad dream also. And a lot of people suffered for that dream, that experiment.
Can I ask a question that is divergent from the topic but kind of related?
Yep.
It looks like the state attorney general did an investigation into the penitentiary on 2nd of August 1979 based on an incident that occurred in July, and they gave a bunch of recommendations. Is that a common thing? There would be investigations with recommendations, or was that one that changed how the prisoners the guards and prisoners work with one another?
Well, the July incident almost certainly was 7/7/79, the riot in 8-wing. And there were allegations of prisoner abuse and theft of property. And we eventually wound up in court over all of that it was more encompassing than just that riot. And eventually, the ruling by Judge Tanner was that conditions of confinement at the penitentiary were unconstitutional. And we wound up being overseen by a court-appointed master who oversaw, meaning they ranked higher than the superintendent and was independent, answered only to the court, as to how we were managing the prison. From my perspective, Jim Spaulding, the then superintendent, and I would see him every once in a while, and the 70s would come up. And we disagreed about that court ruling. I thought that court ruling really helped straighten the penitentiary out. He thought it was abuse of court power and that we were going to straighten it out anyway. But I know what happened is the court ruling and then things got straightened out. So I win.
Gonna cut.
Rolling on sound.
In about 1978, there was an escape from the penitentiary that was pretty significant. There were several inmates led, allegedly, by one of our most famous inmates, Arthur St. Peter. He's famous for his multiple escapes. My dad had been involved in capturing him in the 1940s, escaping from one wing. But in 1978, you had the Lifers Club, which was, you had the wall, the western wall of the penitentiary. Then you had 8 Wing, and then connected to 8 Wing was the Lifers Club. And the Lifers had a yard that they controlled and operated. They actually had a key to a lock on the gate so that staff had to ask them to get in. And somewhere somebody developed an informant saying that there was a tunnel somewhere in Lifers, either in the clubhouse itself or in the yard. And I had gone on searches for this tunnel, and the officers use a very long, thick steel rod that you push down into the dirt. Penitentiary is famous for being able to be tunneled out with nothing more than a spoon. The soil is perfect for tunneling. You don't need shoring, you don't need a shovel. Dirt comes out easily and it stays compacted. So we're used to searching for tunnels by pushing these rods, thinking we will feel the difference in the earth if we hit a void. We didn't know that we had pushed a rod at least twice through the entryway of the tunnel out in the yard. The inmates had cleverly gotten a hold of some thick styrofoam and then would cover it with dirt and compact it. And when we pushed the rod, I don't know that I personally did, but as the story goes, when you push the rod through the styrofoam, the resistance was near enough to identical to natural earth that we didn't discover the entryway. Now, St. Peter and I think it was at least 7, maybe more inmates, which is probably where the informant came from. They included way too many inmates in their plot. And somebody gave it up and informed that it was happening, but we didn't know where it was, when it would happen. And these guys had tunneled from their yard through the basement of 8 Wing to the opposite wall of 8 Wing, tunneled some more for the distance between 8 Wing and the western wall, and then came up right next to the wall in direct view of 3 Tower. Now, when one of the inmates stuck their head out, it was seen by 3 Tower. 3 Tower knew to keep an eye out for escaping inmates. And he grabbed his shotgun. It has double-aught buck 12 gauge ammo in it, and he started shooting and managed to miss every time. 2 inmates got out of the tunnel, and both of them ended up getting shot, I think, by AR-15s. They were both wounded and survived their wounds. St. Peter ducked back into the tunnel, and when officers searched the tunnel, they found a .38 caliber revolver with ammunition, and the informants told us that that pistol was the personal property of Arthur St. Peter. So that was the biggest escape attempt on my watch.
And St. Peter, he got sent out to, was it Missouri he was banished to?
Yep. Are we cut?
No, we're still going.
So yeah, St. Peter, for that escape, he was transferred to a prison in Missouri and died out there in Missouri.
As a matter of
Walla
fact,
was done with him.
I have a postscript to St. Peter. When I was superintendent of Clallam Bay, the director of prisons called me up and he said, "Hey, I'm getting requests from a lot of the old timers asking us to bring St. Peter back. He's old, he's in poor health. What do you think, Dick? Should we bring him back?" And I thought about it. I do have a soft spot for the old guys that have done as much or more time than I have. And they're no longer the same people I knew when I was a kid. And I thought and I thunk, and I called him back and I said, "You know, I don't think we better, because if Arthur St. Peter goes into the chow hall and some kid disrespects him, that kid's going to die." And St. Peter, no matter how old and infirm he is, he's revered as a god. I just don't think we should do it. So he didn't come back. St. Peter dies, and I get a request, "Can you bring St. Peter home?" And I checked. He had been interred. And I thought, well, I happen to know, I've had already inquired about cremations. You can put cremations anywhere. There's no regulation on that. So I thought, well, we could bring him back, have him cremated, and put him in Nine Wing, which is the ancient cemetery at the penitentiary. And when I asked somebody to research that, see if we could do it, Missouri has a law that if you die without family, you have to be embalmed and you're buried in Missouri. And there's so much bureaucracy and law around trying to get St. Peter back to Washington, I dismissed it and didn't do it. So he's in Missouri.
Yeah, that's an interesting story Lieutenant Dodd has about getting him to Missouri.
Oh, he flew him
Right,
there,
he
didn't
flew him back, and it looked
Yeah.
like, Dodd said it looked like he had an escape lined out in Wyoming.
Oh, it's very believable.
So yeah, he's quite the escape artist. But when I'm trying to escape, what's St. Peter do? My lookout? Oh, it got cold. I went back inside the kitchen and warmed his paws. So what's that about?
Yeah.
Cut.
Definitely going in something.
Yeah.
All right.
We are rolling on sound.
Okay, it's not September, I'm sorry. November, we'll get the right month. November 1973.
Let's start the whole thing over to make it easier to cut.
All right. Are you ready? Okay. In November of 1973, myself, David Reel, Jim Fogel, author of Drugstore Cowboy, and Star Rose, decided we were going to escape from this penitentiary, the Washington State Penitentiary. And the plan was to go through the big roll-up truck gate that comes into the penitentiary. And the way to do that, I was in the electrical department, engineering department, so we were going through that gate one day, and I was struggling to get up, and Jim Fogel, who was a machinist in the engineering department, tells old Woody, the officer there, that you need to have Kelly come and look at that gate. It's an electrical contact problem. So they had an electrical device to lock the gate and stuff. So we were able to go in, and the guys are looking at up and down movement and all that, we were able to disable that lock. So now when that gate is down, the only thing that keeps you from raising it up is the fact it weighs several, probably 500-600 pounds. It's a big steel gate. So Star Rose, he makes an adapter to go on a 3/4 ton jack. And we steal a bottle jack, a hydraulic jack. And the plan is we'll sneak up to the gate, put this adapter on so it'll slide underneath that door that's not really locked. It's just the weight keeping it down. And you've only got to jack it up 18 inches. And this hydraulic jack will do that easily. That's the plan. And we decided to do it Thanksgiving. They're having a big movie show. Jim Fogel had used some of his persuasion and got him to play an X-rated movie. The reason behind that thought is everybody's going to go to the theater if they're showing an X-rated movie. You wouldn't think they'd do that in prison, would you? This place is different. So most of the population is either scared to go to the movie, and those guys stay in their cell anyway, or they're packed down into the theater watching this movie. So there's the four of us, and we're walking from the tower where the wall is, back up to the front of the kitchen, turn around, walk back again, just like we're getting some exercise. We do this for maybe 10 minutes or so. So now the guard in that tower, we're right underneath this tower. So that guard, he's not watching this anymore. And it's super, super walla foggy in November. So on about the 10th pass, Stanley, he's got a blanket kind of wrapped around him, and he's got the jack and the tool. So he spins off and stretches out on the ground and covers himself with this gray blanket. And he's working on it. We have Squid Thomas and Arthur St. Peter up at the kitchen as lookouts. If they see somebody coming, they're supposed to whistle out. So the plan's going to schedule. The other three of us are still walking back and forth. The tower hasn't picked up. There was 4, now there's only 3. So it's looking good. The gate's going up slow because you can only get it up so far, and then he has to block it and get another block underneath the jack to get more lift. And lo and behold, who's coming down the sidewalk? Lieutenant Hogjaw Thompson, weighed in at about 300-some pounds. And been no problem if the lookouts would have given us the heads up. We just would have kept walking, and we wouldn't look suspicious at all. But by the time we spot Hogjaws coming, it looks suspicious because we're right up against the wall. And so the three of us, we turn around and we head back. We're living in 6 Wing. So we go to the control room. We stop at the control room. Jim Fogel was trying to set up an alibi. Jim Fogel asks the lieutenant, actually he was a sergeant then, Sergeant Dodd, "What time is it?" And he tells us. So then we walk down to 6 Wing. Well, they catch Stanley, and then they piece it together, all because they know we're all really good friends. But nobody gets charged with attempted escape except little Star Rose. And we go to the inmate court. We're not going to the superior court. Inmate court, and Spaulding, Lieutenant Spaulding, he is the judge for the court. So he calls us in. He calls the 3 of us as witnesses, state witnesses against Star Rose. Well, we're not going to say anything against him. So Jim Fogel gets up there and he tells Mr. Spaulding, he says, "I don't know anything about it. Now we're 8 o'clock. We're up at the control room making faces to Captain Cataract." I still remember Spaulding. "Who?" "Oh, you know, the sergeant with the funny eye, Captain Cataract." So Spaulding wasn't impressed. So they had to find him not guilty. They didn't have any witnesses. They just had a guy that's kind of in the vicinity, and Star Rose is claiming, I didn't really do anything, and it looked so fishy. He had 3 other guys saying, we weren't even there. But Spaulding, he told me a couple days later, I said, I'm going to be watching you, and I'm going to get you. So we had hard feelings for a long time, but I finally worked him back around to the point where before I left, I was running the motor pool and was offered a job to run the motor pool. I told him, no, I'm out of here, Jim. And then he said, well, I could use assistant in treatment, associate in treatment. And we've got the new guy over there. What was his name? He's the, can't think of his last name. Anyway, he was just new. He's from down south. When he talked, he'd sound like Amos on the Andy old cop show. So I went over and I interviewed with him, but obviously you couldn't work with this guy. So that was our great escape. Let down by the #1 escape artist at the Washington State Penitentiary. Arthur St. Peter's, Squid Thomas got cold feet, or cold hands. Oh, that's the only reason it didn't work. It's probably best. I was disillusioned at the time because the court had rejected my appeals and stuff. And then I decided after that, I said, no, that's not going to be the way to do this. We're going to have to do this a different way. So that was November 1973.
Cut.
So was that okay? Or you put your finger down.
Rolling on sound.
One of the biggest surprises when I went to the penitentiary was the fact that the inmates owned everything. They owned the cells, they owned the dining room tables, and the chow hall. Everything was owned. So if you're in the receiving wing, the ding wing, 4 wing, and you want to get out of there quick as you can, because there's just too many crazies in there. So the only way to get out, you got to find somebody you can move in with, or have money to go buy a cell. So like if you're what we would call a rapo, they call them RSOs now, sex offenders, you're probably going to have to pony up some money to buy a cell because nobody is going to take you in for free. I was lucky. I get to move in with Jim Fogel, drugstore cowboy guy. We hit it off great. We were best friends all for years. The chow hall, you wouldn't think the tables in the chow hall would be owned, but they're all owned. In fact, one of the first murder cases that came in under Dr. Conti occurred in the chow hall, 1970. Bad News Harris. They called him Bad News Harris because he's from Wenatchee. And when bad news is in the newspaper, that means something bad has happened to somebody else. So Bad News Harris, he's there doing a life sentence or something for killing somebody in Wenatchee. And it's also, this days, is fish day. The chain buses come in, all the fish people are wearing their coveralls, so you can spot them. When they walk in, it's like, oh, fish. So we're in the chow hall, and this fish goes through, like with a bunch of others. Nobody's thinking much about it. And he goes over and sits down at a table. And as soon as he sits down at that table, it gets kind of quiet, because that's Bad News Harris's table. And this guy is just plump down there like he owns it. And Bad News Harris, he's in the chow line. And I knew him pretty well. I know what he's thinking. Oh, come on, fish, eat. Get out of there before I get my tray and stuff. As he's going through the line, you know, keep an eye on it. I think, God, I hope that guy's gone. I'm sure that's what was going through his mind at the time. Anyway, long story short, Bad News gets his tray, and we have metal trays. In prison, they feed us on metal trays. They make really good weapons. They make good guards for knifings and stuff. You put them down your pants and stuff. Pretty handy. So anyway, Bad News comes back to the table. The fish is still sitting there. And Bad News says, it's my table. You gotta find another one, or go stand by the wall. And the guy, instead of just being courteous and getting up and walking away, says, "No, Pops, you're gonna have, this is my table now. You go stand by the wall." Well, bad news, I mean, everybody's watching. Bad News has a reputation. What can he do? He has to do what he's going to do. Throws his tray on the ground and makes a big clattering sound on the tile. It goes 30 feet down the aisle there. This fish, he's a big guy, probably late 20s. Bad News Harris is pushing probably late 50s. So the fish jumps up and he's going to knock Bad News out. Well, Bad News pulls out a tang off of a pitchfork, it looks like. Kind of like a large ice pick type device. And they're kind of dancing around. Now, if of all things I've said, this is one thing you should always remember. If you're in a penitentiary and you're in a fight with somebody and the guards want to grab you, guess who they're going to grab? They're always going to grab the guy that's unarmed. Bingo. Guards have got the fish, one on one arm, another on the other arm. Got him. What's Bad News do? Well, he could have walked out and, he didn't have to kill the guy, but Bad News thought that was probably the best thing to do. He steps in and just right in the heart. So here we have two cops that are 6 inches away from the murder scene. They're there. We got 15 rats in the chow hall, at least 15, that say, yeah, we saw him. We saw Bad News kill that guy. So they go to court. And this is supposed to be a slam dunk case. This is the first murder case coming down for the new Connie system. Connie's been out there spreading the propaganda. We'll handle our stuff up here. Citizens of Walla Walla do not have to get involved. And people are listening, obviously. So they go to court, and they have all this evidence. And the jury comes back and finds Bad News innocent. And we're all like, what happened? It was like really bizarre. And then there was a murder a couple years later. That was when Blackie Palmer got killed. And he was also found not guilty. And it was obvious. We knew then you could be killed anytime for any reason, and the perpetrator was not going to get convicted in the Walla Walla County Superior Court. It was a chilling effect on everybody, sobering effect, I would say.